Hey, welcome to Gradwell, a limited series podcast that explores various ways the University of Michigan can support its graduate students in their journey to greater well-being in our everyday lives. Brought to you by Rackham Graduate School. This season, we'll be talking to members of our academic community whose research intersects various dimensions of well-being. I'm Sam Hobson, a Ph.D. candidate and a GSSA in Rackham's Professional Development and Engagement Office. My fellow grad students, it's time we start placing as much importance on ourselves as we do our work. You're worth the effort.
And so just paying a little bit of attention, it doesn't have to be a ton, to your finances can sort of pull you back from that stressful edge, keep things, steady and allow you to focus on other really important things in your life.
Hello. Today's resource is Dr. Emily Roberts, a personal finance educator for people who are early in their PhD career. Today, we're going to be discussing financial well-being for graduate students. I am so very excited to have y'all with Dr. Roberts and me today. We are going to get started. So, Dr. Emily Roberts is a personal finance educator specializing in early career Ph.D.s. Through her business, Personal Finance for Ph.D.s, she equips graduate students and postdocs to make the most of their money. She gives seminars at universities and for associations, interviews graduate students and PhDs on her podcast of the same name as her business, and creates courses and workshops on taxes, investing, and more. Emily holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from Duke University and lives in San Diego with her husband and 2 children. Hi, Dr. Roberts. Thank you for being here with me today.
Hi, Sam. I'm so glad you're having me. Please call me Emily.
Absolutely, Emily. To get started, can you tell us how you got into personal finance for early career PhDs?
Absolutely. And I think you might be able to tell from my bio that I came about it honestly, so to speak, and that I had this experience of being a graduate student living on a stipend. And really going back even further than that, I had a lot of support from my parents. I grew up in a middle-class family. So kind of at the end of college, it was like, oh, okay, my parents had never really explicitly taught me anything about money, like about saving or budgeting or anything like that. I was provided for. But then at the end of college, it was like, okay, now here you are on your own. I was on a stipend and that was what I had to live on. And so because of my personality, like I'm an oldest daughter, I'm very responsible. I was like, oh, I've never handled in a sense, a full-time income before. I just had, my part-time work when I was in college. How do I do this exactly? So I started reading about personal finance, consuming personal finance content, and sort of started applying that to, what I was doing with my stipend and making some progress on different financial goals. And then probably about halfway through my PhD, I realized I was really having a growing interest in this area. And I was noticing that nobody was teaching this material specifically for my peer group, right, of funded graduate students. And so by the time I finished my PhD, I was really burned out on research. And I had this passion for personal finance and I had a passion for the community that I came from. And I decided that I wanted to step into this vacuum that I perceived and start teaching personal finance for funded graduate students and postdocs and early career PhDs. And so that's what I've been doing for over 10 years now. Basically, what I do is that I work with universities. They pay me to come and give workshops and seminars. That's the vast majority of the income that I have in my business. So I get to kind of reach graduate students and postdocs without them having to pay me directly for anything, which is really, really great. I like this model.
I like that model too. I have found as well that this vacuum that you're trying to fill, I feel like it still seems to exist. And you're just, one human being.
I'm just one person, yeah.
Right. I feel like we are a very specific population that sometimes goes overlooked.
Can I tell you why I think that is?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're a small population, first of all. So within the higher ed community, there's way, way, way more undergrads, of course. And then even within graduate students, the people who are what I would more call professional students, professional graduate students who are getting those professional degrees, the doctors, the lawyers, et cetera, they get a lot of support. Undergrads get a lot of support and professional graduate students get a lot of support from the university, specifically because of the federal student loan program. The universities are legally required, if they participate in this program, to offer certain degrees of loan counseling, for example. And that's very responsible. That should happen. But there's not as many requirements just on the general financial education or more general personal finance that would apply more so to the people who are getting paid to be in school.
Why is it important to, while we are in graduate school, focus on finances? In undergrad, we're not really doing it. And as a professional, maybe we did it, but then we're in school again. Why do we need to?
Yeah, I love that question. This is one I've given some deep thought to, and I would say that it's important to focus on your finances in the same way it's important to focus on a variety of aspects of your well-being that are important just because you're a human being and you're an adult, okay? So like what I think gets mixed up sometimes is this label of student, right? This label of graduate student. It's true, okay? If you're enrolled in a graduate program, you are a graduate student. But is that a helpful label for you to be carrying through your 20s, maybe into your 30s? Is that helpful? Because we have these associations in our culture with students being broke, with students being starving, with students having school as their primary thing that they're doing, nothing else matters. And maybe that's okay during your undergraduate degree to have this sole focus on just your academics to ignore everything else. But as you get older and as the PhD program drags on and maybe the postdoc drags on, like you can't neglect and ignore these aspects of your whole self and well-being and expect to come out intact on the other side of it. Okay. So I'm not just referring to finances. I'm talking about your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual life, your relationships. All of these things are very important to humans. And it's not something that I think should be neglected or overlooked for the long time that it can take to get a PhD, especially. And if you don't pay attention at all to your finances, and of course, you're living on a low stipend, like it's not like you're living in abundance, right? And you can just ignore things because things are okay, then it can really result in a lot of stress and maybe some financial damage that you could carry forward on the other side of graduate school. I don't want that for people. And so just paying a little bit of attention, it doesn't have to be a ton, to your finances can sort of pull you back from that stressful edge, keep things, steady and allow you to focus on other really important things in your life. Like, I don't want your finances to be such a source of stress that it distracts from your work as a graduate student and distracts from your progress as a professional. And so again, that student label is something that I don't love. I prefer for graduate students to think of themselves as early career researchers or emerging professionals or something that emphasizes that you're an adult, you deserve respect, your finances deserve respect.
I think this reframe is beautiful. I think it is so important. It is not something that I ever thought of before, but I do experience this tension of being called a student, calling myself a student. And yet like the day-to-day is not student-like in any way between sort of my jobs, my research, my writing. And there's this cultural notion of like what it means to be a student and how do we limit ourselves and what we think is possible and how we should focus our attention when we place that cultural notion onto us. Yeah, this is fascinating. This reframe of, how did you call it? Early career researchers?
Researcher,
I love
or an emerging
that.
professional. Yeah.
Emerging professional. Yeah, that is so, I think that such a reframe would really help, at least have helped me refocus some of my attention and yeah, just do things a little differently and treat myself differently as a result. I also think it honors the work that we do more.
You'll see that reframe on the career advice side too. Like these years that you spend in graduate school count as work experience. Like your career does
Yes.
not start post-graduate school. It started much,
Right.
much earlier at the beginning of or not, or even before graduate school, depending on how you'd like to define it. So it's the same thing that I'm just encouraging you to think of, yes, this is real. This is your real career. This is your real life. Like we don't just get to put it aside and say, oh, wait, I don't have to think about that till I'm not a student anymore and I'm 32, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that you're right. I think it brings sort of our whole self into perspective with that shift. So, Emily, I know that we always hear the word budgeting when it comes to finances. So we should be budgeting. Budgeting is something that we should always keep on our mind. And I believe that we all have a concept of what budgeting is, but I want to hear from you, a professional in this matter. What is budgeting? Why is it so important?
Yeah, a budget is just a plan. It's just a plan
Mm.
for what you're going to do with your money over the next month or whatever course of time that you choose. And I do think budgeting is a vital exercise for vast majority of graduate students, virtually all graduate students. I think the only people who can really get away at all without budgeting and still have great financial outcomes are people who have a very high income relative to their natural spending patterns, right? So people
Mm.
who are kind of like naturally frugal, naturally good savers, and they also have a high income. And that just doesn't describe on either one or both points most graduate students, right? I don't think any graduate student would describe themselves as having an abundance of income, right? So whether or not you're naturally frugal or naturally a spender or whatever it is, I do think a budget should be part of your regular practice as a graduate student in planning. Just like you plan your experiments and just like you plan your courses and just like you plan all the things that have to happen between you and your dissertation, like this is just one of those things that needs some attention, needs some planning. So I have some tips to have a functional budget as a graduate student. And the first one is to be very realistic. I don't really suggest creating aspirational budgets or budgets that would be really, really hard to adhere to because that's just not your real life. And like, again, there's very little room for like error when you're living on a graduate student stipend. So be very realistic about your normal spending patterns. And so budgeting usually starts with taking account of the actual recent data, like tracking your spending for at least 1 month before you even start the exercise of budgeting so that it can be realistic and you don't set yourself up to fail because that's very discouraging.
Mm.
And then you'll just
Yeah.
drop the practice altogether.
That I think is really wonderful advice because I think that, well, first of all, the idea of a budget as simply a plan, I feel like makes it feel so accessible and approachable in a way that, I don't know, budgeting is so big and looms so heavy. At least on my mind, I think really the mental hurdle is a lot lower and a lot easier to sort of jump over. And then this idea that like it needs to be realistic. And what I'm hearing from you is that like you have to be quite honest because I think that in the budgets I've made in the past, I haven't necessarily been as honest as I should be about perhaps how many times I eat out in a week, right? Or how many books I buy and maybe don't necessarily read throughout the month, right? But sometimes it's that honesty is hard, Emily. How do we do that when we want to believe that perhaps we're better with money than than we are?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. I think you just have to know that it's better on the other side of the reckoning, right?
Hmm.
Like if you're not budgeting and you are struggling with your finances overall and maybe the credit card debt is, creeping up a little bit more and more every month or maybe the savings is constantly being dipped into or wherever the case is, like that's not a fun situation to be in and
Hmm.
there's just no way to the other side of it, like you said, unless you're honest with yourself. And that can be hard to face up to. But the process of facing up to whatever is going on in itself, shedding a light on it, is probably going to immediately result in behavior change. And that's why, like, tracking what you spend is so important. So there's the practice of budgeting, which I said is making a plan, but then there's did you actually adhere to that plan, which is what the function of tracking is. So like what did I actually spend my money on, and the process of reconciling the plan with the tracking is very, very important. And a lot of people just do one or the other. They only budget or they only track, and they're both
Hmm.
somewhat helpful. But really, when they come together is when the very, very powerful results can occur. But even just with tracking alone, like you mentioned eating out. So, like, just tracking, like, yeah, okay, this month I ate out 12 times. That's what happened. I wrote it down. Probably in the process of actually writing it down or whatever your tracking method is, it might result in some behavior change. You might be like, well, next month you get to 10 times and you're like, okay, maybe that was enough for this month. Maybe I can go to my pantry and like figure out what kind of meal I could make from that.
I don't think I realized that budgeting and tracking are sort of two sides of the same coin. Like both need to be sort of attended to in order to understand one's finances or have a firm grasp on them. Does the tracking need to be like incredibly, incredibly minute? Am I tracking the gas that I put in my car down to the cent? Am I tracking the time that I paid for parking that was like $1.96? Do you know what I mean? Is it how strict are we being with
Hmm.
this?
That's a really good question. And I would say the first time you do this exercise, again, I want to say be realistic, but like I would say be as strict as is realistic for you to be. And then once you have a sense of what the patterns are, maybe you can then give yourself some grace on like, okay, if this is an expense that's less than $5, I just know I'm not going to write that down, and it only comes up 4 times in the course of a month, and that's not enough money to really be getting fussed over. But I think that you need, as we were saying earlier, the realism and the honesty like first, because if you have a $2 expense that you don't write down and it occurs 3 times a day every single day throughout the whole month, like that's going to add up to some kind of significant amount of money, right? So I would say be as strict as is realistic for you. But there's 2 broad methods of tracking. One is to do it manually. So like you have your pen and paper, or you have your Google Sheets, or you have whatever it is that you would like to use to manually write down every single time you make a transaction. And that is very powerful in terms of potentially changing your behavior. It keeps you very intimate with your numbers, but it's also quite onerous, right?
Yeah.
To always have that accessible, to remember to do it every time. And so the alternative to that is to have an automated tracking method. So that's basically software that, looks at all your credit card transactions, all your bank account transactions for you. And not much is going to slip through those cracks, right? Unless you're a heavy user of cash. All the electronic transactions will be accounted for, but you have the option not to look at it. You could just not log in ever. And then it's not really useful in that sense. Like you have all the data, but you're not allowing the data to change your behavior if you never look at it. So you have to find the happy ground for you. And it's different for different people. And at different times in my life, I've preferred one method over another just based on like life circumstances at that time. At base, it has to be realistic. It has to be something that you will stick with and that you'll actually look at, or else it's not much use.
I like that you frame it as data, because that is what's been coming to my mind, that this just feels like data collection rather than like, oh, if I don't get it right this first month, that I'm a failure at finances, but rather, as we like to do as PhD students, like collect data. And then, okay, so then what does the analysis process look like? If we make a plan and we collect data to see the extent to which we adhere to this plan, what does analysis look like?
I like that you brought up not having to be perfect right away, because that is common with budgeting. Okay. So I think the first check is like, did I come in quote unquote under budget overall? Like if I gave myself this amount of money for my spending throughout the month, did I spend less than that overall? Maybe I was over in some category, maybe I was under in some category, but was I less overall? That's the first like checkpoint. And if the answer is yes, then okay, that was good for that month. If the answer is no, you're not a failure. You just get to try again next month, right? And maybe make a more realistic budget for next month. So the analysis is yeah, high level, come in under or over. Within each category, did you come in under or over? And again, is it about being more realistic, or is it about, okay, I feel like I really am able to change my behavior in this one area. I really would like to spend less, usually, right? I would really like to spend less in this one area. What can I do? And you brought up data. I'm now going to bring up experimentation. So what I like to suggest for graduate students who are trying to spend less, let's say in one particular category, which is very common, try a frugal experiment. And I would say it should run for at least 30 days, maybe up to 60 days. And the question you're asking is this particular tactic that I'm trying, one, effective in helping me spend less money in this area, and two, worthwhile for whatever trade-offs there are to make that frugal tactic work? So a really common area for all Americans that they think they would like to spend less on is grocery spending, right? It's a big category within most Americans' budgets. It seems flexible, right? Kind of. It's certainly a variable expense. On a given trip, you can elect to spend more or less at the grocery store. But over a longer period, you're still eating the way you eat, right? So the experiments have to be, I would say, gradual and hopefully something you can sustain. So maybe it's, I'm going to try shopping at a different store sometimes. I will say when I was in graduate school, the closest grocery store to me was a Harris Teeter. So I started off just shopping at Harris Teeter. And it turns out that was not the cheapest place that I could be shopping in my local area. So I started mixing it up and mixing in other stores occasionally. And I would just run to Harris Teeter if I needed something at the last second. But for my bigger grocery shopping trips, I would go to a less expensive store. So that's one little frugal experiment. Can I mix in a different store that has lower prices? Is it worth it to drive a little further? Is it worth it to shop maybe one larger trip instead of, multiple smaller trips? Whatever the experiment is, you have to ask yourself, was it effective and was it worth the trade-offs? I mean, you can run these experiments. I wouldn't suggest doing more than like 1 or 2 at a time, but over a long period of time, you can try a lot of different experiments in a lot of different areas of your finances and figure out what's sustainable for you, what's realistic for you.
I love this idea. It feels really empowering. We've spoken on previous episodes about how it seems as if like getting a handle on our well-being requires a level of experimentation, of playing around with our lives to see what works specifically and particularly for us, right? This whole one size fits all. You should just create a very frugal budget. And if you don't meet it, then it's on you. It's your fault, right? Rather than like what works for me. Perhaps this grocery store is cheaper, but the drive and the time that it takes to do it because I had to do it during rush hour, it's just not worth it. And so then instead of beating myself up for not going to this grocery store, then now I recognize that like it's not accessible for me. And I'm not a failure for not like going to the cheaper grocery store, right? I love that. I love that idea. And I also really, really like what you said about how when you do your analysis and you find that perhaps your plan and your data do not match up, your behavior wasn't in accordance to the plan. I always thought that that meant that you need to change the behavior, but you also just gave us the option, like maybe you need to change the plan. What? That feels so freeing.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
There's not one right way to run your budget, right? It's not dictated from on high. So yeah, sometimes you can change your behavior just by having additional awareness or some new ideas or some new effort or whatever. But sometimes it's just that the plan needs to change. Absolutely.
This conversation for me at least is making finances and the conscious awareness of it feel less scary. Just feel a little less scary, which is nice.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Emily, you've given us so much already. Are there any other best practices that you recommend for budgeting?
Yeah, kind of going off of what we were just talking about the realism and running experiments and so forth. Like sometimes you're going to come in under budget. Like I kind of defined it earlier. Like overall, yeah, I was under here, over there, but overall, did I spend less than I intended to this month? Have a plan for when you go over budget and have a plan for when you go under budget. And what I mean by that is if your plan, if you go over budget, is just, okay, I have more credit card debt, that's going to kind of mess up your next month's budget too. Like it's going to, it's going to be a problem that like propagates itself along. So I would really rather you just had like a little buffer amount of money. Could be like maybe $500, even $200 would probably help. Just a small buffer amount of money that you could draw from. If you're like, hey, I went over, $75 this month. I just have this little buffer that I can draw from. I'll try to put it back in a future month. Likewise, when you come in under budget, does the extra money, let's say you had like $25 extra, does it go to that buffer amount of money? Does it go towards a financial goal? You can kind of decide where it's going to go. But what I don't really want to have happen, and this has happened at different times in my life, is like, okay, month after month after month, I'm coming in over budget. And there's just, what's the effect? Is it credit card debt? Is it drawing down savings? Like, it is realistic to know that some months you will go over budget. It's also realistic you'll go under budget. And so just have a non-judgmental plan about that, right? Like when that happens, this is what I do. I have a protocol for it. Again, ideally it's not accumulating credit card debt, but if that's where you are, then that's where you are. And you just have to know, yeah, okay, every time I go over budget, I'm accumulating my credit card debt and I pay more in interest, and that's the effect of it. And again, facing up to it is hard, but it's healthier to do so. So yeah, just have a plan for when you go over, have a plan for when you go under. Another thing in there about being really realistic with our expenses is not to forget when you make your budget about irregular expenses. And irregular expenses are those that occur not on a monthly basis, but maybe once per year or a few times per year. And the ones that are really tricky are the ones that are fairly large. So these kinds of irregular expenses are like maybe if you pay an insurance premium once per year, once every 6 months, or maybe there's a tax or a fee or something you have to pay to your university, once per term. It could be travel related, obviously buying flights or any kind of, accommodations, those sorts of things can really add up. If you own a car, almost anything having to do with your car that's not a monthly payment or gas is an irregular expense. And so if you make your first budget and all you look at is the stuff that occurs every single month, that's not a realistic budget. And you're going to go over within the first couple of months, probably because one of these irregular expenses is going to pop up. And so part of that budget being really, really realistic is accounting for these irregular expenses in some manner. And there's kind of two basic options for doing that. One is for having in your budget a miscellaneous line item that's just big enough that it can cover any of these irregular expenses.
Mm.
That didn't work for me when I was a graduate student because some of my irregular expenses were multiple hundreds of dollars per month, and I couldn't just have a line item in my budget every single month that would cover that degree of chaos. So what I started doing as a graduate student, I still practice it to this day because I find it so valuable, is what's called a system of targeted savings, also known as sinking funds. And so what this is basically you anticipate an irregular expense. You tell yourself, okay, how much is it and how far out is it? How many months do I have in between now and then? And then just write this smaller line item into your budget. Okay, I'm saving for this particular irregular expense. You put it aside in a different savings account, not in your general checking. And if everything goes to plan, then by the time that expense hits, you've saved up enough to cover it. And then you pay for that expense out of that particular savings bucket. And if you think about it, this is kind of the thing that people do with credit cards anyway. Like they'll just kind of put an irregular expense on a credit card, knowing they can't pay it off that month, but knowing that they can pay it down over the course of maybe 3 or 6 months or something, they'll eventually pay that off. It's kind of just taking that and putting it in reverse and just saying, okay, instead of paying for this expense after it occurs, plus the interest on a credit card, I'm going to pay for it in advance. It's like putting something on layaway. I'm going to pay for it in advance in installments. And then by the time I actually have to part with the money has accumulated and it's there for me. And so, yeah, when you're making that first budget, don't forget about these irregular expenses. Really sit down and do some brainstorming on what's going to come up for you probably in the next year and how can you manage that.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And I feel like that's definitely something that has tripped me up because, I'll evaluate the previous month and which didn't have the irregular expenses. And then all of a sudden card tax comes and I'm like, where did you come from? Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to not only have a month's bird's eye view, but also an annual bird's eye view and recognizing that the plan, also thinking about that makes me think about maybe plans for different months, either in different seasons.
So what you're speaking about now is what is called a unique monthly budget. So there's a template monthly budget, which is where every month is pretty much the same and you can apply the same template to every single month. And a unique monthly budget is every month is different and you're going to create a different budget for every single month. And my suggestion of using targeted savings or sinking funds is to help you make a template budget, to help every month look the same.
Okay.
Whereas you could instead make a unique monthly budget and say, yep, this month I know I'm making my 6-month car insurance premium payment. And so that means I can't do X, Y, and Z that I might like to do because I have to make room for that expense in this particular month. And like you said, some things are seasonal, you can see them coming and so forth. So it's really down to your preference. I just end up suggesting this targeted savings method for that template monthly budget to graduate students in particular because they generally have so little wiggle room in their budgets that a larger expense, if not anticipated and not accounted for, can really throw them off. And what it really helped me do when I was in graduate school, and again, still to this day, is it helps me make a connection between these annual expenses and my monthly expenses, and helping me prioritize. So let's just take, for example, discretionary expenses. So things that are totally optional, but that we definitely want to do. So for me in graduate school, it was like, okay, I want to attend all these weddings I've been invited to that I have to travel for. I really want to go, right? I love going to weddings. Would I rather put more money towards saving in advance for being a wedding guest, or would I rather spend more money on a monthly budget in discretionary categories like eating out or entertainment? And so I just kind of made that, once I was able to make that connection between these annual and monthly expenses, I was able to really, again, be honest with myself and say, I would rather go and be with my friends and family on these wonderful milestone occasions. I'd rather do that. I'd rather put more money towards that over like eating out more, for example, on a monthly basis. So for me, it helped me make those value judgments. Where would I rather put my money?
I love the way that you framed it as value judgments of how do we value the things that are in our budget and our plan, that they're not all weighted the same. And we get to make the decision on what weight that we want to put on them. I know you have even more budgeting tips for us. What else do you have for us, Emily?
Last one, and I'll just make it quick. It is write a savings rate into your budget, even if it's $5 per month.
Hmm.
right in a savings rate, because we'll get to this, but if you don't save at all and you're not able to save, you don't build up savings, then you're going to live in financial stress, as we mentioned earlier, throughout your graduate degree. So just make a plan that you are going to be saving, even if the saving is $5 per month. Because what this does is it forces you to, one, have a destination for that savings. So like you actually open up a savings account and put $5 per month in it, ideally as an auto draft. But put it in your budget, enact it in your finances, pay yourself first, which is a wonderful practice. Get paid, then, do your $5 transfer, auto transfer between checking and savings. Puts a destination there. And then maybe after, a few months, you're used to that. You're used to saving $5 per month, and you tell yourself, maybe I could do 20. Maybe I could do it. I've done some frugal experiments. I've freed up some room here. Maybe I could do $20 per month. And you just gradually build up either your savings rate or just the savings itself can accumulate and just give you a little bit more breathing room. So like from the first budget that you write in a savings rate, think of yourself as a saver and practice it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is it is about the practice and not necessarily about the amount, because I think $5, what is $5 going to help me with at the end of the year? But it's about simply engaging in the practice of saving, which would then help me become a person who saves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I know that you also talk about taxes for graduate students. They're different?
Yeah. For funded graduate students, they definitely are. Tax software, which is what the vast majority of graduate students are using to prepare their tax returns. Tax software is not designed with the avatar of a funded graduate student at the top of the list, right? The avatar that they're designing for is probably the parents of a college student, right? Like a
Mm,
dependent college student who has maybe some scholarships, but a lot of tuition type charges, fees, those sorts of things. Someone who's in the red with respect to the university. It's not designed for someone who's in the black, who receives more money from the university than they're paying in tuition related expenses and so forth. Likewise, if you have like a normal job in America, if you're like an employee, you receive a W-2 at tax time and your benefits are run through your employer and a lot of them are tax free. And that just might not be the case for graduate students. So I have this model that I teach in my tax education that, let's just say with respect to your stipend, we'll talk about that first. Your stipend can come from employee income, like W-2 type income, because you have an assistantship. That's what most universities would call it. If you were a part-time employee, they would say you have an assistantship. That part is pretty straightforward. But if you have a fellowship or if you're on a training grant, this is what I call having awarded income. It's not reported on a Form W-2. That's where things get a little sticky, because depending on the university and the funding source, they can report it different ways. And those different ways can ultimately be confusing to the person who receives the documentation, or maybe there's no documentation. And it's also confusing how to communicate that with tax software in a way that comes up with an accurate result.
I see. And so, what exactly do we need to know about how this process works for graduate students?
Yeah. So the process that I take people through in my tax workshops is, for some people, it can feel a bit tedious because they're used to kind of ignoring a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Like they just want to ignore everything that happens in the student account. Like, yeah, tuition gets charged there and also tuition gets paid there and I didn't do anything. So I'm just going to ignore all of it. That works until it doesn't.
Hmm,
So it works for a lot of people. A lot of graduate students who are fully funded, they get 100% of their tuition paid. They get 100% of their fees paid. And that can work out very nicely tax-wise, can become very simple. But that's not the case for all graduate students. Some people don't get their tuition fees 100% paid for. They're still paying out of pocket, so to speak, or out of their stipends for some of those types of expenses. And certainly any graduate student, as I mentioned, who has awarded income for their stipend, fellowship type income, that gets kind of complicated. So what I like to walk people through is accounting for all of your income sources as a graduate student. That's your W-2 stipend, your non-W-2 stipend, and all the money that goes towards paying those benefits behind the scenes that you might want to ignore. Let's not ignore them. Let's look at them. Look at all the sources of income, and then look at all the expenses, all the education related expenses. Could be things like tuition fees, could be things like textbooks, software. Cast a wide net in what you could be your personal computer, maybe professional development. Cast a wide net in what you think your education expenses are. And then we can figure out, using one of the 3 higher education tax benefits that are available, which one or which ones are most appropriate for your situation to get an accurate tax return, most importantly, and a minimized tax return in terms of minimizing your tax liability owed. This awarded income source, which is like fellowship, scholarship type income, mostly what goes into your student account is like scholarship type income. A lot of people want to ignore it, but when you ignore it, it results in inaccuracies. And I'll give you an example. I've sort of looked at the situations for some of the schools in like the Bay Area where they have very, very expensive health insurance premiums. And if you kind of ignore everything that is going on behind the scenes in your graduate student account, you just go off of what your 1098-T says, students in that situation are going to end up overpaying their income tax bills by easily over $1,000 per year, maybe closer to $2,000 once you account for like state tax in California. Now, that's an extreme example because their health insurance is so expensive in that area. It's not the case everywhere across the US, but I will say that if you're a graduate student and if you're on the student health insurance, if you're just trusting your 1090-T to give you all the information that you need, you're probably overpaying your income tax. And it's really, really worth a thorough study, digging into all the numbers to figure out where you're leaving tax benefits on the table, whereas you could be minimizing your tax liability. And I do not think graduate students can afford to overpay their income tax. So I really think it's worth the time, worth the hour or two to really dig into these numbers. And again, tax software is not designed intuitively to help you with this. So you kind of need some additional knowledge to interface properly with tax software to communicate to it all the relevant numbers.
So what I'm hearing, Emily, is that you have a plan to help build a tax software for graduate students that can help
Again,
us.
Sam, I'm just one person.
I know you do so much for us already.
Actually, what I have heard from people who are on fellowship is that the software package Free Tax USA is the most intuitive to use to help them report that fellowship income properly, to get all these qualified education expenses corralled properly, to properly report the fellowship stipend. And the good thing is I just looked this up for this tax season. So the IRS offers this program called Free File. And so if your income falls below a certain level, you qualify for access to one of their tax software partners. And Free Tax USA is one of those partners. So Free Tax USA, you get a free federal return no matter who you are, but they'll charge you for a state tax return. But if you go through the IRS Free File system, you'll get both a free federal and state return through Free Tax USA if your income is below a qualifying level, which for tax year 2025, it's $51,000. So if your household income is below $51,000, you should be able to get a free federal and state tax return through Free Tax USA. And like I said, it's just something I've heard probably about the last 7 or 8 years from people in our PhD community, heard over and over again that was the easiest package to work with.
Emily, is there anything else that graduate students need to know about this whole tax process?
Yes, I would be remiss if I did not say the words quarterly estimated tax in the course of this interview, because if you are on fellowship and you are a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or resident for tax purposes, your university is almost certainly not withholding income tax from your paychecks. And so that means, unfortunately, for a lot of graduate students, they don't know this and they get to the stage of preparing their tax return and they come up with a 4-figure tax bill, right? That is very difficult to pay, as we were just talking about, on a graduate student budget. So instead, if you're in that situation, if you're not having income tax withheld from your paychecks, and generally speaking, if you're on fellowship, that's probably the case. Instead of waiting to the end of the year to reconcile your tax bill, you can get ahead of that by making quarterly estimated tax payments. So that means that up to 4 times per year, you engage with the estimated tax system at the federal level and, if applicable, the state level. And you just make a payment. It's sort of like in place of your withholding, like you don't have income tax withholding, so you do this quarterly payment instead. And that way you can kind of keep up throughout the year and you'll face a much, much, much smaller tax bill, or maybe you'll get even a small refund, perhaps if you overpaid throughout the year. And it's much, much better to do that because if you're supposed to be paying quarterly estimated tax and you don't, the IRS can charge you penalties and interest. And again, graduate students cannot afford to overpay on their income tax. So I think that you should just get ahead of it and not fall into that situation. So depending on the time of year exactly this is released, the quarter 1 payment is due on April 15th. So same as tax day every year. And then the quarter 2 payment is due in mid-June. So just look up those payment deadlines and figure out if you do need to pay quarterly estimated tax. The way you do that is by, at least at the federal level, is by filling out IRS form 1040 ES for estimated tax ES. That form is it's a one-page form, but it'll just tell you at the end of it if you are or are not required to pay estimated tax, and if so, in what amount.
Hmm. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. You spoke earlier about financial goals, and I want you to help us understand what are they. I know that we're bringing you in next month for an in-depth, actionable workshop on financial goals, but can you give us a little teaser? Why do financial goals matter? How can we even sort of dare to dream of having financial goals as graduate students on stipends or limited incomes?
Yeah. I love this premise of like why does this whole workshop even need to like exist? Because there's lots of different types of financial goals you could have. Like you could have a budgeting related goal, like we were just talking about, running a frugal experiment. That's a kind of financial goal. Tracking your expenses, that's a kind of financial goal. Specifically, the types of financial goals I'm going to be talking about in the workshop are ones that increase your net worth. So your net worth is the sum of all of your assets, which is all the things that you own, minus the sum of all your liabilities. Those are all the things that you owe. So it's like money in the bank account, investments, if you own any significant property, minus all of your debts, right? That's what your net worth is. And so in this workshop, we're going to be talking about the types of goals that increase your net worth, broadly speaking, saving, investing, and repaying debt. And the reason why I think they're so important is kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation of like, it is really tough to go through, let's say, 5 years of a PhD program or more, plus the postdoc, in financial precarity, in living completely paycheck to paycheck, having nothing to rely on outside of that paycheck that comes once a month or twice a month or whatever. You're just living on a razor's edge, and it's not healthy. And it's not, I don't want to understate, it's so difficult as a graduate
Yeah.
student to not be in that situation. It's
Yeah.
amazing if you are just even treading water, not going into student loan debt, not going to credit card debt. Even if you are doing those things, you're still doing amazing as a graduate student. It's very tough to live on a stipend. But as I was saying earlier, the financial stress that accompanies that is not healthy for your body. It's not healthy for your mind. It's not healthy for your work. Like, this is one of the reasons why I'm so strong an advocate for graduate students being paid a reasonable, comfortable stipend. I'm not talking about anybody like getting super wealthy on a graduate student stipend, but being paid enough that you don't live in financial stress and precarity is in the best interest of the university. It's in the best interest of the advisors. It's in everybody's best interest for graduate students to be able to function, excel in their scholarship, progress towards their degrees, and their financial health is part of that. So I want to emphasize part of it is getting paid enough. And it's not your fault if you're not getting paid enough, but part of it is getting paid enough. That's on the people above you. But it's also, in a sense, graduate students can come together and collectively advocate for being paid more. That's great. So I don't want to blame anybody if they're not able to save, if they do live in financial precarity. But the fact is that it is stressful and it's not ideal. And anything that we can do to get out of that, whether it is advocating for higher pay or whether it's figuring out your budget so you can spend less in some areas, freeing up some money for a savings rate, as we were talking about earlier, even $5 a month, so important. So that savings rate, whatever it is what we're going to be using towards these particular types of financial goals. It could be building up cash, it could be repaying debt above the minimum, or it could be starting to invest. But that's what we'll talk about in the workshop, and specifically the order in which I think these things should happen. Because
Mhm.
as a graduate student, if you're saving $5 a month or $50 a month, and you're trying to split that money across like 5 different goals, you're not going to feel like you're making any progress anywhere. You're frankly going to get discouraged and give up and say, it's not worth it for me to save $5 a month or $50 per month. But if instead you put that money towards just one single financial goal at a time, and you make relatively quicker progress toward that goal, it's more encouraging. And then you may even find yourself wanting to figure out how to save more because it's so satisfying to make progress toward that goal. And you'll be making progress toward that goal. So that's what we talk about in the workshop, the order in which to do things. What's priority number 1? What's priority number 2?
It seems like investing is a little different during graduate school. Why is it important to, perhaps if we weren't focusing on it before, or maybe it's not prime on our mind, why is it perhaps something that should be in the forefront?
Yeah. So starting to invest in the framework that I'll teach in this workshop, it's step number 4. So I'm going to get you through a few steps to sort of stabilize your financial foundation before we even start talking about investing. But I do find that a lot of graduate students are very excited about investing. They want to get started. They have gotten started. They're not sure if they're doing it right. They were investing in a previous job and now they're not anymore and they feel some anxiety about that. So there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around investing, which is amazing. But we won't get there till step 4. But once there, it is a little bit different than in other life situations. And so as you mentioned earlier, the vast majority of graduate students are not offered a workplace-based retirement account. There are some exceptions, very rare. Most of them are not offered this. And so that's very different from when you had a different kind of workplace with a 401k or a 403b. You don't have access to that most likely as a graduate student. So the investing looks a little bit different because it's more on the individual to get started. It's not something that can happen automatically or close to automatically through your workplace. It's really on you to make all the decisions too, because when you invest inside your workplace-based retirement account, your employer probably chose 1 or 2 providers to potentially work with. They have a limited selection of investment funds you could possibly go into. It's just a limited universe. Whereas when you strike out on your own with investing, the world is your oyster. You can make any choice you want, and that can become kind of overwhelming. So that's one of the big differences is that you have a lot more choice, and the choice can result in analysis paralysis for a lot of graduate students. Even though they're excited about it, they don't want to make a misstep, like you were talking about earlier with budgeting. Like they don't want to make a wrong step. And so they don't get started, even if they're financially able to do so. And that is a huge mistake. I mean, it's an understandable mistake, but it is a mistake because you're saying, like, why is it important to get started investing if you're ready for it as a graduate student? It's important because of the time value of money, which is related to compound interest. So when you get started investing and you invest in something like the stock market in a well-diversified way, over the decades, what that looks like is exponential growth of your money. So at the beginning, it seems small. You're adding little bits of money. But then as time goes on, as the decades goes on, the money itself begins to grow in such a way that it starts to way outstrip what you even contribute on a month-to-month basis. The money itself is growing faster and faster. And if you look at exponential graphs in your work at all, like, you know how powerful that is. And that's what happens, or let's say historically, has happened with stock investing, again, well diversified over the long term. And so if you get started with investing, let's say at the end of graduate school or at the end of your postdoc, could be even like 10 years after you started, right? Versus nearer to the start, that's 5 or 10 years that you've lost in terms of compounding time. And so you've lost maybe one doubling or more than one doubling at the end of your career, right? It can have a huge effect depending on how long you wait. I don't want to freak anybody out about this. Like, it's understandable if you don't get started with investing until after you have a much higher salary, like after graduate school. That's okay. But if you're ready for step 4 and you don't start engaging with this process, it is a big loss of time. And time is the most powerful factor you have on your side when you're the age of a typical graduate student.
Wow, I feel like that's a really compelling reason to get started for sure. I am glad that you will be there to help us because I have no idea. And I feel like a lot of my peers maybe don't either. And so we're grateful for you. So, Emily, you have given us so much to work through, and I'm incredibly grateful. What are the most important things that PhDs should know about finances?
Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning of our conversation and talk about that label and like treating finances like it is an important part of your overall well-being. So I won't reiterate, but that is really important. So on top of that, something that we touched on earlier as well is it's great if you can accumulate some dollars, here, there, maybe pays down some debt during graduate school. But possibly even more important than that is changing your mindset around money, changing the habits that you have around money, putting into place like positive practices around money. Like I mentioned earlier, even if you're just saving $5 per month, hey, at least you opened a savings account and you like have a place for that money to go. And that maybe later when you have more opportunity to save, it's something you can do right away. Oh, I already have the mechanism set up. I have the account open. It's right there. It's ready to go. I think that will apply very, very well once you are out of graduate school, and to whatever the next step is, you will almost certainly be earning more money. So sort of doing this work while a graduate student around your finances, It may result in a higher net worth. It may not, but if you do the work, it's certainly going to result in you being better positioned to really hit the ground running and use your higher salary well once it materializes. So that's I think, one of the most compelling reasons to be working on this, even as a graduate student. Even when the numbers are smaller, it'll still make a difference once those numbers get bigger.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And I feel like that also maybe takes a little bit of the pressure off as well. Like, oh, we need to be making such leaps and bounds in our sort of like financial abilities at this time. It's like, actually, no, perhaps we're cultivating the habits of somebody who can then make leaps and bounds once we have a salary that can allow us to do that with a little more ease rather than having to learn then. Particularly, I think if we're comfortable and adjusted in our graduate program, and so we're not sort of learning how to be a graduate student and also how to do finances. Whereas when we transition perhaps to a full-time job or even an academic position, we're relearning that, but also now also having to figure out the financial aspect of it as well. And that feels like too much on our plate. So it'd be nice if we already just knew what to do.
In a parallel way, I've heard that actually from, again, sort of people on the career side that help PhDs. Like, it's so helpful before you get your first like post PhD full-time job offer. It's so helpful to know like the language of
Hmm.
how companies or whatever sector it is that you're going into, like the salary, the benefits, the employee assistance plans, like just all those sorts of things, like understanding. So you can actually just read the offer letter and understand what's in the package. And like you're just saying, you're not both trying to consider that particular job and trying to understand exactly what's being offered you. Like if you do the understanding part earlier, you can then evaluate these offers more quickly and with more facility, and then, make the best choice for you. And again, with these transitions, like out of graduate school to whatever is next, having a better handle on your finances as a graduate student may set you up in a position to negotiate better for your next position if negotiation is an option, because you can be more realistic about how far that salary is going to go. If you're able to do things like estimate your tax responsibility and figure out, okay, if I contribute, 10% to the 401k, that's going to take my paycheck down by this much. And you can kind of do these analyses. Even if it involves changing cities, you can kind of do some cost of living analyses and say, okay, I know how much I live on now as a graduate student in this city. How much does that translate to in that next city? And do I need to ask for more because I want to be more comfortable than that? Or is this a good offer? You can do that evaluation on the career side. You can also do that evaluation on the financial side. And again, the more familiarity you have with your own life and your own numbers, the more you're able to do that at that stage.
I love that. It sounds so empowering. So, if a graduate student were interested in strengthening their financial well-being, where should they go? What should they do?
Okay, I have 4 kind of categories of suggestions. The first one is at your own university. So at the University of Michigan, I just Googled it. There is a financial wellness office. It's hosted out of the financial aid office. So you can go there and you can figure out what events they're putting on, if they offer counseling or one-on-one coaching, or there's all kinds of different resources that these kinds of offices offer around the country. And so wherever you're listening in from, go check your university for these types of resources. I didn't look this up for Michigan, but I know that a lot of universities also offer basic needs kinds of services. And so you can get help on things like food. Like you might be able to visit an on-campus food pantry, assuming that you qualify, which you may as a graduate student. You can kind of offload. I guess I just think about it as getting as many benefits as you possibly can, like from your relationship with your university. So if they offer one-on-one financial coaching, go get one-on-one financial coaching. If they offer some basic needs support, go get it, assuming that you qualify, and that'll help you reduce your expenses and free you up to have more savings or whatever it is that you need to do within your finances. So your university offers a lot of resources. I guarantee it. It's just a matter of tracking them down. They may or may not be advertised very well to graduate students, but they almost certainly do serve graduate students. So that would be like the number one place to check.
I do know that we have some basic needs resources, and you're right, the advertisement to graduate students isn't always there. And so we'll make sure to link as many of the resources as we can in the page for this episode.
Okay, number 2 resource, and I hope you don't mind, it's a self-plug, but this is what I do, right? It's my area of specialization. So, of course, come to the workshop, but I also have a podcast, as you mentioned earlier, called Personal Finance for PhDs. I've been doing it for like 7 or 8 years now. I have hundreds of episodes. They're mostly interviews with other graduate students and PhDs. And so I hope that you will find them very relatable and very actionable and very inspiring. And so if you want sort of graduate student specific content, I would say go, subscribe to my podcast, Personal Finance for PhDs, or go to my website. My website is pfforphds.com, and the transcripts for all the episodes are on there, as well as a bunch of articles. And because we were talking about tracking your spending earlier, I wanted to mention I do have a free tracker, like an Excel spreadsheet for manual tracking. You can grab that again at my website, pfforphds.com/tracker. So if you do that, you'll get on my mailing list, and then you'll hear about new podcast episodes and all the other stuff that's going on. So definitely check out my stuff if you want graduate student specific content. But the third category is books. I started out by reading personal finance books. I still think they're a great way to learn new information. And so 3 of my favorites in the financial space, especially for people getting started, are I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. It's a good overview of a lot of different areas of personal finance. Similarly, Get Good with Money by Tiffany Aliche. Tiffany, the budgetnista Aliche. I find that she has the most realistic approach to budgeting I've ever found within the personal finance space. So I really like that. And then a third great book is The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, which is about investing and how to do it in a simple way that doesn't make it a part-time job and it's not very expensive, and just kind of an automated set it and forget it, like get wealthy over the decades kind of approach, which I really, really like. The fourth category is other sort of personal finance content creators. Like I love podcasts. That's what I listen to. But of course, whatever your, preferred channel of information and entertainment consumption is, you're going to find financial educators on that platform. And so I would say, come to me if you want that graduate student specific content, but you're going to be able to find a creator that you relate with if you try to find one out in the wider personal finance education space. So just find other people who you want to listen to or watch that you find inspiring and empowering. And I think the more people you kind of have in your ear telling you that this is possible for you and it's approachable, the better and the less stressed you'll feel about it.
What I really appreciate about all the resources that you've shared is that it seems as if financial well-being is not just a one and done type of situation. This is sort of we need to sort of be reading and to be listening and sort of just incorporate the gaining of this knowledge and the growth of our financial wellness as an aspect of our lives. And that makes it feel less like, oh, I have to know everything now type of pressure, to just see it as a space where we can grow.
Absolutely. And a space where you can make incremental progress. Like look at 5 new ideas, decide that you're going to try out one of them, and then make that change and make it sustainable, either by making it an automated thing or by somehow changing a habit or a mindset that makes it, more automatic for you to fulfill it. But it can be very gradual. This is absolutely, you are going to have a relationship with money for your entire life. So not a lot of pressure to get it right from the beginning. You're going to make mistakes. I've made tons of mistakes with my finances. I love talking about them in my workshops. They're recoverable from, and you can learn from them also. But if you're not engaging and you're not doing that learning and making those mistakes, then nothing is going to change, and you'll be where you are for a while. And I want to just say, as we're kind of finishing this up, like you can make this incremental progress as a graduate student. There's always some kind of step that you're able to take, even if it's a very minor one, and you can make that positive change even in your current career stage.
Thank you for that reminder. I think we all need to hear it. Emily, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us before we go?
Just come to the workshop. I'm so excited to do it. And yes, the topic is financial goals, but if you stick around to the end, feel free to ask me any question you want about, money related to the graduate student status. And I would be absolutely delighted to chat with you. So I really hope everyone listening will make an appearance and we can have a conversation there.
Thank you, Emily, so very much for this incredibly informative conversation. I have grown so much. I've got a lot of research to do, and I'm really excited to do it.
Well, thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to connect with people ahead of the workshop.
Okay, here are 3 takeaways for your well-being journey. 1, a budget is just a plan. And as graduate students, we're really good planners. We make plans for our research, for our time to degree, for the courses we teach, and we know how to experiment with and adjust those plans according to the data that we receive. Budgeting is no different. Even if it may feel a little scary at times, you probably have more experience in it than you might realize. 2, our taxes aren't like everybody else's, and it's important to get a firm grasp on exactly how they work to ensure that you're not paying more than you have to each year. And 3, you deserve to start increasing your net worth, even if it's just $5 a month. That money will grow faster and faster as time goes on. So if you can, get started now. And to help you get started, make sure you sign up for Emily's workshop with us next month. It's linked in this episode's description. You deserve to take control over your financial goals. She will help teach us how. Check out our website for all of the resources Emily mentioned and more at rackham.umich.edu/Gradwell. You can reach out to Emily with any questions you have at emily@pf4phds.com. You can contact us about the podcast at rackhampdeworkshops@umich.edu. And make sure to join us for another bonus episode that y'all requested and my last episode with Gradwell, when I chat with Dr. Courtney Polnick and Dr. Amanda Leggett about caregiving as graduate students for the aging adults in our lives. I'll see you then. Hey, hardworking grad student. Thank you for tuning into Gradwell. I hope you can take something away from this episode with you. If you like what you heard, be sure to write a review, like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, check us out on social at UMich Grad School.